Hello, this is Peder Norby of Trapcode. Today I'll show you a tutorial on how to create this kind of thing. So basically we have a footage that's creating particles, and we're using motion vectors calculated from that footage to drive the initial velocity of the particles. So to complete this tutorial you'll need some way of generating motion vectors. I'm using Revision Twixtor Pro. It has a plugin called Motion Vectors Create. And there's also ways to get motion vectors out of other softwares, but I don't know that really, so I'm going to show you the way that I know. And you also need Particular. Version 2.2 introduces the motion vector support. Okay, let's get started. Alright, so here I have my footage layer. It's just shot with an iPhone, so not very good quality. And I shot it with on the horizontal like this, just to get more of the motion actually recorded. And it's important to actually crop your comp. If you have lots of unused space that never moves, it's important to crop away that. So just find the rectangle that encompasses all of the motion and use that and crop the composition to that size. This is because you don't want areas that are not moving. They will only take longer time to render, and you will actually end up with less particles from the motion stuff that way. So, but in this case I already have it pretty well cropped. And also I'm going to use the whole of this clip. Normally you would probably edit in this comp. Let's call this footage. So this is just the basic footage, but in here you could do the cropping and the trimming of the layer. Alright, so this is the footage layer, and I'm just gonna pre-compose this, or I'm using my own method, which is just dropping it onto the comp here. And so this next comp, we call it MV for motion vectors. So it only contains the footage layer so far. And to get motion vectors, it's really simple. If you have the Revision Twixtor, you use this plugin called Motion Vectors Create. Let's see here. So the max displacement is really high, the default. So usually something like 80 or 70 pixels. I think this value is in pixels, is more reasonable. And now you can see I'm starting to get something here. And if I take, this last one here, when I just raise my hands really quickly, we can see that if you look in the inspector here, the values for well, the red channel, it's pretty much at half, like 127 the whole time, but the green channel, which corresponds to the y-axis, it changes from 127, 126 down all the way to 0. And you actually never want it to really hit 0. That means it's cropping the or it's saturating. So you could actually increase this a little bit, displacement, so that it doesn't go to 0. Now it anyway went to 0, so increase it a little bit more. And I think that's good enough for me here. And this, I'm not really a professional on this plugin, but so I'm just showing you how I've used it here. But I bet there are some more finessing that you could find out from the Revision guys. I've also noticed that you get some, let's see if I can get that. Yeah, these kind of situations where the motion vectors seem to spread out a lot. I mean, the footage, I'm just here, right? So it shouldn't be going all the way out, but that can be fixed by setting down the sensitivity here. And now it's more actually in the areas where I am moving. But yeah, this part I would say talk to the revision guys. They're much better than me at setting this up. There's lots of options here for masks and stuff that I don't really know. One thing I will mention is the track frame. You can either track the previous or the next frame. So previous tracks the motion from where you are to the previous frame, and next to the next frame. And because of that, it's like changing the sign. Let's see if you can see that. So pretty much everything gets inverted on the X and Y axis when you flip this switch, and that's because it's, well, calculating in different directions. And you can keep this at next if you want to use positive values inside particular, but if you want to use previous, you can also use that. Just use negative values, but I'll use next here. Okay, so now I have the motion vectors in the red and green channels. The blue channel though, that's always at 0, and 0 is not a good, that means that there is actually some motion. So we need to add just a deep blue solid, 0, 0, 127, and set the transfer mode to add here. So now we've effectively neutralized the C channel, the in and outwards motion, to just be still. And of course, it would be nice if it could actually calculate the C channel, but it's hard to do from 2D footage. But if you have a 3D application, you might have access to the C motion vectors, which could be really cool, I think. But this is essentially going to be a 2D effect. We can't really move the camera or anything here. Okay, so that is the motion vectors, and now let's move on. Okay, so the next step is creating a new composition, and we'll call this diff. And in here we want to reapply the footage layer. Why is that? Oops, what's happened? Diff. Okay, put in the footage layer, and I want to create. I want to see what's going on. If something is moving, I want to know that which pixels are moving. And there's this effect called time difference that does exactly this. So I apply that, and I can use a time offset. So you can see how much you need here, but fairly low value. And then use the absolute difference to get so that anything that's not moving, or anything that's where the pixel values aren't changing, becomes black, and the other thing, and you can see the kind of the contours this way. So this is just to get information on which part has actually moved. I'm sure there's ways to get that out of the motion vectors. I just found this method to be, well, this is the fastest one I could find, and so I'm using that. So now I want to use the motion vectors layers, but with the lightness of, let's see here, Luma matte of the difference layer. So now I have, as you can see, 0 alpha or almost 0, and actually this, we need to take care of this so that this alpha is completely 0, and we'll do that by creating an adjustment layer, applying levels, and we can go into the alpha and set this value to 10 or whatever you need for your footage. Depends on how noisy it is, but for this I know that 10 is enough. You can see that the alpha channel is now 0, except for where there is motion, and there we have an alpha channel based on how much the pixels are changing, plus we have the red, green and blue, or I should say the red and green channels reflect in which direction this movement is happening. So using the motion vectors plugin is absolutely essential to get motion vectors. You cannot use the difference effect for that. It only gives you which pixels has changed, but never in which direction anything is moving. So just wanted to make that clear. Okay, but now we're having a pretty good source here that we could use to drive the particles. So let's get on with that. Let me create the final comp, particle man, and I'll bring in my emitter layer here and scale it so that it fits. And I also need to switch this into 3D because in particular can only use 3D layers as emitters. Okay, now I create the solid for particular. Apply it. Grab code particular. And so the emitter type is a layer, right? And the direction, I want to use directional because I want to use the actual motion vectors. I set the all these randomnesses down to 0. And the velocity, I'll set it to, this needs to be pretty high. I'll set it to 2000. Let's see if that works. And then we have the actual layer emitter settings, and I need to select the layer that I want to use. I must use particle birth time for this to work. And as you can see, now it's starting to think here a lot, and it does this for a bit, and then it goes back to being pretty fast again. So, but it's I guess it's pre-computing the this pre-comp here, the MVDiff, over time. So it might be helpful to actually pre-render that part if you get a lot of these stalls. But I think it's working pretty well most of the time and pretty fast. Okay, now let's see if we can get some particles out of this thing. So let me just first find a good position in time. Maybe these things, when I move my hands like this, is pretty good. Okay, let's try that part, and let's enable particular again. See what's going on here. So basically we need a bunch more particles, and this, it looks like I forgot the you see, this looks like they're coming towards me, so that indicates the C channel. But it's okay actually. Okay, so something else is wrong. Yeah, I forgot to actually set the mode that I wanted. So these are some new modes here. These three at the bottom, new for particular version 2.2. The one I want to use here is RGB to XYZ velocity. This one with the color, it's more or less a debug mode, so you can see what velocity or what color that particle had, so you can match, so you can understand a little bit more how particles, the color corresponds to the velocity. But this is probably the mode you want to use though. And actually turn off the visibility of the layer and render a few frames here. And you can see now that it actually seems to be working. I was waving my hands to that side and then to the other side. Okay, but we need more particles. So that's looking pretty cool. And some other things we should do here is decrease the particle life, something like 1 second. I mean, that's completely up to what you're doing, but the lower times seems to work better because they only get the velocity at their birth, and then so you want them to die pretty quickly, not go on forever. Always add some randomness to life, makes it look a lot more natural and better. And I think I want some smaller particles here, and perhaps even more. I'll just set this up to the maximum, which is I had this render here, as you can see. But yeah, the new cache, very good, the new After Effects cache. So I had exactly these settings, and After Effects recognized it, and because I'm doing a retake here, I messed up. Anyway, so that's why it didn't have to render. But so let's have a look at this. Starting to look pretty cool. If you are really observant, you might notice there is a little bit of a problem here with, and this is the random numbers. When you're using so many particles, as 1 million here per second, the random number generator gets into repeating behavior, and so that's a problem with software. It's a weakness that I'm aware of. For now, what you can do is to just change the random seed a little bit, and normally you can get out of those situations. Okay, and well, I mean, from here it's fun to start playing with stuff like gravity, adding a floor or wall and bouncing particles off of that, and but I think now I've gone through the basics of creating this effect. So I hope you'll have fun with this technique. Thank you for listening. Bye bye.